This is Biography.
I'm going to amount to something. You wait and see.
She was one of Hollywood's most beautiful and promising talents.
She just had a stunning radiance. She glowed from within. You cannot take your eyes off of her.
But Frances Farmer's life was not a fairy tale. Her meteoric rise to the top was cut short by a debilitating addiction to alcohol, numerous arrests, and years of confinement in a mental institution.
I don't think that anyone has risen so fast or fallen as fast as Frances in the history of Hollywood.
It would be hard to survive everything that she went through with your spirit and intelligence intact. But she had tremendous personal strength and reserve. She was a real warrior.
In 1913, Seattle, Washington was growing into a prosperous and culturally progressive city. It was here on September 19th that Frances Farmer was born, the third child of Ernest and Lillian Farmer. Her father was an amiable man and a moderately successful attorney.
My grandfather was, by all appearances, very undemonstrative, very laid back, very quiet. My sense is that he was aloof emotionally, not really available.
Lillian Farmer was a headstrong woman whose volatile temperament overwhelmed that of her meek husband. When Frances was 4, her parents separated. For the next 7 years, she was repeatedly uprooted as Lillian moved her children from one town to another in California. Though Frances longed for the stability her mother seemed unable to provide, she nonetheless adored this energetic woman who recited the poetry of Longfellow as loudly as she denounced the evils of communism.
Frances was crazy about her, but she never got very much demonstrations of love in return. One of her slogans was, be yourself and make up your mind and act on it.
By the time they returned to Seattle in 1925, Frances was a 12-year-old tomboy. Athletic, intelligent, fiercely independent, she loved weekend visits with her father, clowning around with her siblings, and writing poetry. 2 years later, Frances enrolled in West Seattle High, where she joined the hockey, tumbling, and volleyball teams, became a champion debater, a member of the yearbook and newspaper staff, and even found time to appear in school plays. Frances was maturing into a strong-featured, unconventional beauty. But though she was one of the busiest girls on campus, she remained a loner who rarely socialized with her classmates.
It's very interesting to see her yearbook photos because even in the group photos, she's kind of off to the side. I don't think she had a lot of close friends. She tended to keep to herself.
In 1929, the Wall Street crash precipitated a nationwide depression. Frances was appalled as people lost their jobs and bread lines sprang up on street corners, while a select few escaped unscathed. Along with thousands of other young intellectuals, she began to question the country's capitalistic society and started to think about the advantages of socialism.
Seattle at that time was very labor-oriented and left-wing. And she was obviously very well-read, very smart. So I think she grew up in a place, in a time, and in a family atmosphere where that kind of free thinking was promoted.
In 1931, Frances won $100 in the National Scholastic Magazine's student writing contest for her philosophical essay, God Dies.
As I understand it, she decided that God had died because she had lost a favorite hat of hers. And after a short time, she found it. Meanwhile, a friend of hers from school, her entire family was killed in an automobile accident. At that point, she figured out that there couldn't be really a God because he would never let anything like that happen. So she said God died.
You could tell at 16 this was somebody who was trying to figure things out. She wasn't just kind of a happy-go-lucky teenage girl who was, wearing bobby socks and going on dates. And she was really trying to think things through and find her place in it all.
The thoughtful teenager underestimated the furor her composition would stir up. She was denounced from the pulpit and vilified in the press as a dupe of godless communism.
I think it was horrible for her. She was not a popular person to begin with. And I think that's when the epithet of her being called a freak started. People started, to stay away from her.
Shunned by her peers, Frances eagerly enrolled as a journalism student at the University of Washington. But instead, she was drawn to the more progressive theater department and found companionship with like-minded souls who hotly debated artistic integrity and the rewards of socialism. With her striking looks and instinctive gift for acting, she was soon the star of such plays as Uncle Vanya and Helen of Troy. In 1934, local reviewers applauded her performance as a German musical prodigy in the play Alien Corn, and proclaimed that she was destined for Broadway. Acting had become a passion for Frances, and she was determined to make a life for herself on the stage. But New York seemed a million miles away. In a rally of support, the entire drama department entered a contest sponsored by the Voice of Action, Seattle's communist newspaper. They sold enough subscriptions in Frances's name to win her first prize, a VIP tour of the Soviet Union, via Manhattan.
Well, I don't think Frances had that great an attraction to go to Russia. The one thing about this contest that attracted her was the fact that it would take her to New York City. And that's where she had decided she wanted to go to get involved in acting in a real serious stage career.
But Frances's mother was aghast that she would consider traveling to the Soviet Union, a communist country that few Westerners dared to visit. Fearing that her daughter would be brainwashed, she forbade Frances to go.
I think that they butted heads because they were so much alike. They were both very strong-willed. They were both very independent. Unfortunately for Lillian, Frances was already 21 and could do whatever she damn well pleased, which is exactly how Frances phrased it to both Lillian and the press.
In April 1935, Frances defiantly boarded a steamship bound for the USSR. The idealistic young woman was profoundly affected by the degree of poverty and suffering she witnessed. But the majesty of the Russian theater made her more determined than ever to get on with her own stage career. When Frances returned to the United States, she moved into a small apartment in Manhattan and began pounding the pavement in search of work.
Well, it was the middle of the summer by the time she came back, and that's usually the deadest season on Broadway, so there were no casting calls going out for any stage productions. And one way or the other, Frances met Oscar Serlin, the talent scout for Paramount, and Oscar Serlin arranged for a screen test for her.
The studio was sold on her, but Frances had reservations.
She felt that Hollywood was not a place to be for an actress. In the 1930s, if you were a serious young actor, legitimate theater was Broadway, and Hollywood was the illegitimate theater.
Desperate for money, Frances put her dreams on hold and signed a 7-year movie contract with... When she arrived in Hollywood, glamour girls like Jean Harlow and Marlene Dietrich were the ideal. And the studio immediately began grooming Frances Farmer for stardom.
Paramount, like all the studios in that day, ran an acting mill. The newly signed people were put through image makeovers. It was a grueling process. She absolutely hated it. Her comment when she saw herself after her first press photos was, "Well, Miss Farmer, it's definitely not you."
Within months, the actress was starring in her first film, a B-movie called Too Many Parents. Set in a military academy, Frances played the headmaster's compassionate daughter.
Thank you, Miss Sally. crazy about you and you don't know he's alive. So he invented a father who wrote him sweet, loving letters. The kind that any real father would write to a boy like Phil. And that's what he gets for saving your reputation as a human being.
What are they doing to him?
They're just taking away his sword, that's all. The sword that he worked so hard to get. That's all they're doing to him.
Too Many Parents was a hit at the box office, and Frances suddenly found herself in the spotlight. But she felt like an outsider in a town where commerce seemed more important than art. Her only other friend was a young contract player, Wycliffe Anderson, who later changed his name to Leif Erikson.
Well, they were in classes together, and they realized that they liked acting together. She had developed a very real attraction, if not a deep-seated love, for Erikson. By that point, the studio was trying to get her to go out on publicity dates with all of the young men that had been signed there. And so she saw him as kind of a security blanket in terms of protecting herself from having to go out on these horrible publicity dates.
On February 8, 1936, the couple eloped to Yuma, Arizona. In only 5 months, the dissident from Seattle had been transformed into a rising star with a handsome new husband. But Frances Farmer's dreams extended far beyond the boundaries of Hollywood, and her willful ambition would soon take her to the brink of disaster.
It's good coffee. Considering that I didn't make it myself.
Why don't you stay on and then tomorrow you could make it?
I thought you were trying to get rid of me.
In 1936, Paramount cast Frances Farmer in an A-list comedy, Rhythm on the Range, starring Bing Crosby and Martha Raye. Frances lit up the screen playing a rich girl on the run.
Tell me, do you often go around picking up cars like this?
Oh, that's the only way I ever get a car. On impulse. See it and take it. That's me.
Don't the police ever bother you?
Oh, quit arguing. 3 can ride as cheaply as 1.
Listen, why don't you tell me where you got this thing? Maybe I can square it. You don't know it, but doggone it, you're being a criminal.
Oh, yes. And your bull is being an accessory.
Rhythm on the Range was one of the year's top box office hits. Director Howard Hawks was so impressed with the 23-year-old's accomplished performance, he cast her in a challenging dual role in Samuel Goldwyn's drama, Come and Get It. The picture was based on Edna Ferber's best-selling novel about 2 generations of Wisconsin loggers, and Frances starred as both a tough saloon singer and her own innocent daughter. Frances blossomed under Hawks' open, collaborative style of directing, and she was thrilled when he welcomed her opinion on everything from dialogue to costume design. But shortly after production began, Hawks was fired over a creative dispute with the studio and replaced by William Wyler. When Wyler belittled and rejected her suggestions, Frances was insulted and waged an all-out war with the director.
She'd go to the mat on everything, and that was just her nature. There was so much of her that was difficult in a time when women weren't expected to be difficult, especially in the Hollywood studio system.
The pressure on Frances to carry the film was intense. Her impatience and quick temper alienated both cast and crew. Still, Frances turned in a riveting performance.
Why can't you go home to your folks?
Because well, if you must know, there's just 165 reasons why I can't go home. And all of them are dollars.
Railroad fare, huh?
Ain't that enough? You think that kind of money grows on trees?
Mine did. Now look, here's enough for your railroad fare and some to tide you over until you get yourself a decent job.
I get a few dollars, too.
What's the catch?
No catch. I like you.
Hey, you may look all right to the naked eye, but you better stop drinking. And you better take care of his money for him.
The film also provided her with a showcase for her rich contralto singing voice.
Sam and Pike, I heard him sing, singing all of me.
Come and Get It premiered in Frances's hometown at Seattle's Liberty Theater.
Lillian was ecstatic when Frances became a movie star. This was the best of all worlds for Lillian. It was publicity, my daughter is famous, there's money coming into the house. This was one of the few times that Frances and Lillian really got along.
The young actress was paraded through town like a visiting dignitary. It appeared her past transgressions had been forgotten, but Frances had a long memory.
She meets one of the people that derided her about her essay back in high school, and this person is fawning all over her, and she just looks at him and says, "Don't you remember me? I'm the freak from West Seattle High," and storms off.
Come and Get It was a smash hit, and Frances was touted as the next Garbo. But studio chief Adolf Zucker was not so sure. While other ingenues eagerly molded themselves into images of living perfection, Frances continued to march to her own drummer. Off the set, she took pride in her unkempt appearance, modest home, and broken-down wreck of a car.
She obviously had a great desire to be successful, and yet at the same time, she wasn't willing to do it on their terms. And they were not willing to do it on her terms.
Paramount was frustrated with their eccentric star. In 1937, they loaned her out to RKO Studios to portray the mistress of real-life tycoon Jim Fisk in The Toast of New York, opposite Edward Arnold and Cary Grant. Frances was excited about the complex part and began extensive historical research. But when censors turned the unscrupulous character into a romantic heroine, she fought in vain to restore the integrity of the material. By the end of production, her demand for perfection earned Frances more enemies than it did friends.
In a word, I think she had a sense of arrogance. She just made it clear that she felt she was better, which, maybe that was disguised inferiority.
Despite her misgivings, The Toast of New York was a success. Frances was rushed into 2 more movies, Exclusive and the Technicolor High Seas drama Ebb Tide, opposite Ray Milland.
Who are you?
I'm Faith Wishart, Captain Wishart's daughter. He died carrying out orders, if you understand what that means. I'm here in his place. He was taking his cargo into Sydney, and that's where it's going now.
Oh, yeah? Shut up.
I've warned you fairly. Don't change your course.
Now considered one of Paramount's top female stars, Frances was disappointed to discover her status did nothing to improve the quality of material she was being given.
She was bright enough to know that most of the stuff she was doing was just churning it out, just lowest common denominator. But she didn't have the ability to kind of shut her brain off, do her gig, go home and have fun.
In a desperate attempt to pursue her dream of a career on the New York stage, Frances took on a series of roles in summer stock. To her amazement, she was approached by Harold Clurman, director of New York's left-wing group theater, and offered the starring role in their production of Clifford Odets' new play, Golden Boy. Playing Lorna Moon, a tough tramp from New Jersey, Frances headed a cast that included such talents as Luther Adler, John Garfield, and Elia Kazan. Golden Boy ran for an impressive 248 performances. Frances believed she had found a home with the group theater and the love of her life with Clifford Odets. During production, she had embarked on a tempestuous affair with a radical playwright who was married to actress Louise Reiner.
She really was in love with Clifford Odets. He used her because he knew that she was flattered by his attention, basically to give money to the group theater to keep them solvent. She finally felt that she was simply being used for her money and her name, so that sense of idealism crashed.
Frances's self-esteem and confidence were shattered, and her heart broken when she received a wire from Odets stating, "My wife returns from Europe today, and I feel it is best for us never to see each other again."
His breakup was so cruel and caught her so off guard. I think she felt very betrayed. because it wasn't just like a sexual or romantic betrayal, but it was also a professional one, an artistic one. So all the things that were important, I think, in her life at that time, he really did a number on her.
Demoralized, Frances began drinking heavily. She returned to California, her commitment to Paramount, and her estranged husband. In 1938, she and Life shared the screen in Ride a Crooked Mile. But halfway through the shoot, the 25-year-old discovered she was pregnant.
Erickson completely freaked out because he thought this was going to put the kibosh on his burgeoning career and urged her to have an abortion, which she did. It resulted in her never being able to be pregnant again.
Frances was angry and bitter over the outcome. She decided to divorce Life and return to New York and the Group Theater for 2 more shows.
Both of them were resounding flops and shook Frances's confidence right down to the ground. Again, it found her in New York, alone, barricaded in her apartment and drinking.
Hoping to get her career back on track, Frances signed on for a Theater Guild production of The Fifth Column.
She tried to get going into this play. She's tried to get ready for the rehearsal. She tried to gear herself up for it. But she reached a point where she just knew she couldn't do it, and she resigned.
Actors Equity fined Frances $1,500. She was blamed for the show's failure and found herself an outcast in New York theater circles. She realized she would have to cave in to conventionality if she wanted to survive. But for Frances Farmer, conformity was a 4-letter word. By 1940, Frances Farmer had seen her chances for a meaningful career on the legitimate stage slip through her fingers. At the age of 27, Frances decided she had no choice but to make a life for herself in Hollywood. In an effort to live up to studio expectations, she bought clothes befitting a movie star and rented a lavish house on the beach. Her return was well publicized, and she quietly endured the public wrist slapping. But Frances's compliance went unrewarded. Over the next 2 years, Hollywood's one-time Golden Girl was cast in supporting roles in a series of run-of-the-mill films. Frances was drained by her unsuccessful efforts to reclaim her career. She began taking amphetamines, which were commonly prescribed for depression. The combination of drugs and alcohol only made her behavior more reckless.
I think there is a kind of personality shift that happens with alcoholics, at least some alcoholics, and Frances definitely fit that mold. When she was sober, she was elegant and graceful, and you would never hear a off-color remark. But when she was drinking, you would think it was a truck driver.
In 1942, despite her questionable reputation, 20th Century Fox borrowed Frances for the supporting role of a conniving beauty in Son of Fury, starring George Sanders and Tyrone Power.
A strange fellow, Ben. Moody. Quick to take offense. What would you say, for instance, if you were to learn who told me that I'd find him at the George and Crown the night that he was arrested? What would you say to that, my dear?
You wouldn't dare.
Wouldn't I?
And even if you did, he wouldn't believe you. Why do you think he came back? For revenge? No, for me. He loves me. All his life he's worshipped me. He'll do anything I ask him, believe anything I tell him, even if you were to swear to him on a Bible. Ben, you mustn't believe what he says. It isn't true, Ben. It isn't true.
Although Son of Fury was a box office hit, Frances spent a long, lonely year before she was cast in her next project, Take a Letter, Darling. Unfortunately, her drinking was now out of control, and when she failed to show up for rehearsals, she was fired. By the fall of 1942, the United States had been at war for almost a year, and blackout laws were strictly enforced. One night, Frances was stopped by a highway patrolman for driving with her lights on high beam in a dim-out zone. When the officer tried to ticket her, Frances spat out, "You bore me," and took off, pursued by the irate officer. She was hauled into night court, given a suspended sentence of 180 days in jail for drunken driving and put on 2 years probation. The news spread through Hollywood like wildfire.
Paramount cancels her contract. She's high and dry. No money, no career. She was frantic.
In 1943, Frances was living in a room at the Knickerbocker Hotel and reduced to working for one of Hollywood's Poverty Row studios, Monogram Pictures, in a film called No Escape.
She's pretty much hit rock bottom. She evidently on the set sees imaginary people, an imaginary dog that she keeps shooing away. She keeps breaking out in singing at inappropriate moments.
The situation came to a head when Frances lost her temper and hit her hairdresser, Edna Burge, with a hairbrush, dislocating her jaw. When Burge pressed charges, authorities discovered that there was already an arrest warrant out for Frances, who still owed $250 on her drunk driving charge. Police officers barged into her hotel room while she was sound asleep in the nude, and all hell broke loose.
Knock the doors down. She runs naked into the bathroom, locks that door. They knock that down. And because of an alcoholic blackout, she doesn't realize what has happened. She doesn't really remember why they're here. Why are they doing this to me? They drag her out through the lobby, and again, there are the photographers, and the headlines are just the most unsavory that you can imagine.
When Frances was taken down to the station and booked, she offended even the most seasoned officers by describing her occupation with a shockingly lewd term.
It was just this instinct for performance gone a little bit off. She knew a remark like that would, at a minimum, raise eyebrows. So she did like to blow minds.
The judge asks her about her drinking. She says her famous line, "I put liquor in my milk and in my orange juice, and what do you expect me to do, starve to death?" And then the judge gets very irate and slams her with the 180-day sentence. She picks up an inkwell off a desk, throws it at the judge, and hits him. Then she's dragged out of the court screaming. More photographers, more headlines.
Frances was transferred to the psychiatric ward of Los Angeles General Hospital on January 20, 1943. Her humiliated parents flew down from Seattle, and Lillian Farmer immediately attempted to take control of the situation. She blamed the communists for her daughter's condition and penchant for alcohol, and agreed that Frances needed several months of rest in a sanitarium. But despite the hundreds of thousands of dollars Frances had earned, she was destitute. She had given her money to her parents and numerous left-wing causes. The Screen Actors Guild came to her rescue and placed her in the Kimball Sanitarium. Unable to control Frances's outbursts, doctors prescribed a program of 90 insulin shock treatments, which caused her to lapse into brief comas. By the time she was released 8 months later, Frances had given a lot of thought to her future and announced to her mother that she wanted to give up her movie career.
Frances really, at one time, wanted to save herself. She wanted to find a life that would be nurturing and that she could actually flourish in. She understood implicitly that continuing with a movie career would be, death for her. But she came up against her mother's will.
Lillian was aghast at all this. She was so disappointed that her daughter was like taking away all this stuff that had made her so bright in her eyes there for a while. At one point they had an argument that was so bad that Frances threatened to kill her. And Lillian used that. She had her committed.
On March 24th, 1944, Frances was admitted to the Western State Hospital at Steilacoom, where she was diagnosed as schizophrenic and insane. There, she underwent a series of electroshock treatments. Still, she remained defiant and combative. To calm her down, hydrotherapy was also prescribed. Frances was submerged naked in a tub of freezing water and left there for hours on end. After months of continuous treatments, Frances appeared subdued. Considered cured, she was once again returned to her mother's care. But when she made several attempts to run away and was arrested for vagrancy, Frances's mother sent her back to Steilacoom.
For somebody like Frances, whose major problem was substance use, her prognosis was excellent. And even if she did have a personality disorder, this is usually not the type of disorder which causes somebody to be chronically hospitalized.
Doctors at the asylum now diagnosed Frances as hopelessly insane. Her head was shaved and she was thrown into a ward designated for violent inmates.
The treatment and the conditions in mental institutions were crude compared to today's standards. Individuals at times, especially in the back wards, were often treated only slightly better than animals. The idea, I think, for Frances was to try to get through it, to try to survive, both physically and mentally intact as much as possible.
In 1950, after nearly 5 years in a mental institution, Frances was released into the legal custody of her mother so that she could act as a nursemaid to her ailing parents. On March 25th, 36-year-old Frances Farmer returned to the house in Seattle, where she lived, for all intents and purposes, under house arrest. By 1953, Frances Farmer had spent 3 long years caring for her aging parents and living with the fear that her mother could have her recommitted.
I think probably her spirit was broken. I mean, if you're not crazy before you go into 5 years of a snake pit, you're going to be a little bit whacked when you come out. She seemed beaten and resentful for it at the same time.
In an attempt to seize control of her life, Frances demanded a hearing to restore her independence. She was devastated when hospital administrators informed her that she had been a free woman since 1951, a fact her parents had neglected to mention. Frances arranged for the care of her mother and father and took a job as an attendant at the Olympic Hotel. But out from under her parents' watchful eye, the friendless woman began to drink once again.
I'm sure there was enormous heartbreak and sadness in Frances because she was trying to drown that sadness in her drinking. And I think there was just an incredible regret for what she had squandered.
Seeking stability through marriage, in 1954, Frances impetuously wed a civil engineer named Alfred Lobley. But after 6 unhappy months, the 42-year-old left her husband and quietly settled in Eureka, California, under her former name, Frances Anderson. She took a room in a boarding house, a job as a secretary at a photography studio, and attended Mass every Sunday. But Frances's life out of the spotlight wouldn't last for long. In 1957, she met Lee Mikesell.
He was a traveling salesman, and he becomes obsessed with her. He decides that he wants to bring her back. He wants to bring back Frances Farmer, the movie star.
Although she had no intention of reviving her career, she was swayed by Mikesell's take-charge attitude. He helped Frances gain sobriety, arranged for her divorce from Lobley, got her a job as a receptionist at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, and notified the press. In June of that same year, Ed Sullivan invited Frances to appear on his show.
As the blackbird in the spring, 'neath the willow tree, sat and pined.
She was obviously terrified and very nervous, but again, that incredible inner strength and reserve just rose up again, and she made it through the song beautifully, and she brought down the house.
Once she was convinced that the reaction from the Ed Sullivan Show was really as warm and as caring as it turned out to be, she was quite willing to come back, knowing that the people really did want her.
Almost overnight, Frances was being offered work in regional theater and television. In 1958, Ralph Edwards invited her to be the subject of his hit show, This Is Your Life. But Frances was unprepared for the difficulty of reliving her past in front of millions of viewers.
On the sound stages, your brilliant mind fails you now, and you become more and more uncooperative, less and less competent. Resentment against you mounts in all quarters until no more parts are offered you. In loneliness and despair, you turn to drink.
You can see the painful memories it dredges up, and you can see some tremendous anger flit across her face. But it seemed very exploitive, which it was.
Other stories accused you of being an alcoholic. Were you, Frances?
No, I was never an alcoholic.
Did you ever use dope?
No.
If you watch closely, you can see the tears well up in her eye. She bites her lip heavily. You can see the torment she's going through.
That same year, after entering into a marriage of convenience with Mike Sell, Frances accepted a minor role in the teen movie The Party Crashers. The experience was disappointing and unsatisfying, but the actress felt revitalized when she returned to the stage with the touring company of the Chalk Garden. While performing in Indianapolis, Frances was offered her own show on a local TV station in which she would introduce the afternoon movie and interview visiting celebrities. Leaving her husband behind, she transformed herself into the elegant hostess of Frances Farmer Presents.
Well, Marilyn Louise Shaft, I think, first of all, I want to say what a wonderful day it's been for us as judges being here watching this contest.
It was an ideal world for her because she was a hometown celebrity. They were respectful of her privacy, and she was working regularly. She had a great amount of self-esteem. Those were good years for her.
45-year-old Frances began taking pride in her new life. She was named Indiana's Businesswoman of the Year and struck up a close friendship with a woman named Jean Radcliffe.
It was a wonderful relationship for her. And she was finally living a life that had some semblance of normality to it.
In 1962, Frances was honored to be named Actress in Residence at Purdue University, and over the next few years appeared in a series of classic plays.
I felt she was very imaginative. I know she was sensitive, and she could have a quality that they, many, many years ago in the theater called spirit and fire, which was that wonderful kind of charismatic thing.
But despite her amazing turnaround, Frances was unable to overcome her addiction to alcohol. And in 1964, she was fired from her television show. Making the best of a bad situation, she and Jean moved into a farmhouse outside town, and for the first time in her life, Frances formed a close circle of friends.
Frances and Jean, with no money at all, had turned it into a showplace. It was warm, inviting, eclectic, and we just spent every weekend with them.
Over the next 3 years, Frances was content giving poetry readings, making plans to establish Indianapolis's first repertory company, and working on her autobiography. It was a peaceful and productive period, and her demons seemed at bay.
I feel very strongly that if this woman had a place to work and she was doing something that she really respected and loved, if she had that, I think she would have been a very, very happy person.
But in April 1970, Frances was diagnosed with cancer of the esophagus. 3 months later, she was admitted to the charity ward of Indianapolis Community Hospital.
I remember seeing her one afternoon, and I had gone up the stairs and she didn't know I was there, and the light was hitting her, the sunlight was hitting her just right, and she looked like a young girl, and she was radiant. And I could tell that she was happy, and she wasn't afraid, and she wasn't fearful of facing her own mortality.
On August 1st, Frances Farmer died of cancer. She was 56 years old. But Frances's story didn't end there. In the years to come, she would achieve in death the fame more lasting than anything she had known in her lifetime. In 1972, 2 years after her death, Frances Farmer's autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning?, appeared in bookstores throughout the country. Rumors circulated that Jean Ratcliffe had taken over writing Frances's original manuscript and finished it in the first person.
I think that Jean embellished all of the business about the Steilacoom, the mad ward, and the lesbian attack, and all of these things that was from her mind, and she thought it would enhance a possibility for a sale of a movie.
You can hear a couple of voices going in it. And some of the more sensationalized passages don't sound like Frances.
To add to the growing controversy, in 1978, William Arnold's biography, Shadowland, was published. This was the first time fans heard about a possible lesbian relationship between Frances and Jean Ratcliffe, and allegations that Frances had been subjected to a lobotomy while at Steilacoom.
The doctor's son claims he's got a photograph of Frances on the gurney, either right before or after the operation. It's a woman on a gurney. I can't say it's not her, I can't say it is her.
Well, that's always been the rumor. She talks about patients in the institution who begged to be lobotomized because they just didn't want to feel anymore. So it's hard to believe that if she herself had had a lobotomy, why didn't she just say that she did?
The public's fascination with Frances Farmer only grew when in 1982, Universal Pictures released a film entitled Frances. The movie starred Jessica Lange, who not only bore a striking resemblance to Farmer, but also felt a strong bond with the actress.
I really loved Frances. You know, there was something about her that touched me so deeply. Sometimes I actually, and I know this sounds like kind of mumbo jumbo, I could actually feel her presence. I mean, it was a powerful entity.
I think what she captured was a large part of the inner sense of Frances. Her intelligence, her strength, it was just uncanny. It was as though Frances' spirit had come into her.
You're trying to break my spirit. You're trying to turn me into you, Lillian. But I'm not you, and I never will be. And I thank God for that.
Lange's Oscar-nominated portrayal brought Farmer the legions of supporters she lacked in life. After 30 years, her story is still clouded by controversy and conjecture. But what remains clear is that throughout Frances Farmer's life, her indomitable spirit gave her the strength to endure overwhelming hardship and personal despair.
It's a terribly sad story. I mean, it's a tragic waste of a brilliant human being.
She had incredible wit, she had incredible intelligence, she had taste and grace. She was a magical creature.
There was strength and a vulnerability, and after knowing what she endured, it made me respect her even more.
She was a survivor. I think that the moral of her story is that she survived.